So it's a pro.
Yeah, I should have been about 15 minutes. He got stuck in that.
We want to. Good afternoon to all. I'd like to welcome everyone and call to order the June 23rd, 2017 meeting of the Texas Industrialized Building Code Council. Welcome to everybody. We'll start with a roll call and certification of quorum. Just to those that are joining us from the public, please know that there is going to be a public discussion session on the agenda, and if you would like to address the council, please, there's a form somewhere that I think if staff can help, that you need to sign in and let the record show that you're here to speak to the council. I will start with calling of roll. I am Rolando Rubiano, Chair and Present. Mr. Roland Brown.
Present.
Mr. Randy Childress.
Present.
Mr. Brian Eisenrich. Mr. Brian Eisenrich. Mr. Steve Fitzpatrick.
Present.
Mr. Eddie Martin.
Present.
Mr. Scott McDonald. Mr. Scott McDonald. We've been told that Mr. McDonald is en route, and should he arrive, we will make note that he's arrived and joined the council. Mr. Mark Reimert.
Present.
Mr. Jesse Ryder.
Present.
Mr. Douglas Robinson. Mr. Douglas Robinson. Mr. Dub Smith. Mr. Dub Smith. Mr. Larry Wilkinson.
Present.
We have 8 members of the Code Council present. Can I just get confirmation from staff that meets quorum?
It does.
Okay. And I do certify we have the numbers required for quorum, and we can get going with the meeting. Agenda item C, approval of meeting minutes from our August 22nd, 2016 meeting.
Motion to approve. Second.
I have a motion to approve by Mr. Randy Childress and a second from Mr. Roland Brown. Any discussion? There being no discussion, let's take a vote. All in favor of approving the meeting minutes as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passed. Thank you. Let me get these signed. And Tamla, these are here for you when you're ready. Along with Tamla, if it's okay, I'm going to hold on to the roll call until the end of the meeting in case Mr. McDonald shows. All right, folks. Then if there's no request to move out of sequence on the agenda, then we can move to staff reports, item D of the agenda. Donna or George, if anybody can help.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Nick Voinis with TDLR, and I'll give you our executive staff report to kick it off.
Thank you.
As most of you know, since your last meeting, TDLR's longtime executive director, Bill Kuntz, retired last fall, and the longtime deputy executive director, Brian Francis, was promoted to executive director. After that, to handle the kind of growing workload at TDLR, Brian hired a deputy executive director and a chief of staff. Our new deputy executive director is Carla James, who came to us from the controller's office, and she's responsible for operations and regulatory services. I joined TDLR as chief of staff from UT Austin, and I handle external services. As you can imagine, over the last few months, a lot of our focus has been on the 85th session of the Texas Legislature. State House Senate convened in early January and adjourned on Memorial Day. And they'll be back for a special session next month. This session, more than 6,500 bills were filed, and TDLR staff tracked a total of 341 bills. 130 were directly related to current TDLR programs. 20 dealt with newer transfer programs, and 191 bills that, if enacted, would have affected agency operations. It was a total team effort. Everyone worked hard either analyzing, monitoring bills, or providing feedback or resource testimony. TDLR leadership attended 65 hearings before 20 different House and Senate committees. And also wanted to mention, last year through our extensive strategic planning process, that we developed 7 strategic initiatives with a total of 56 statutory recommendations and 1 management action. And the 85th Texas Legislature adopted 93% of all TDLR statutory recommendations. That's 52 of 56, and we're real proud of that. As for this specific program, during this session, only 1 bill, and it was House Bill 4072 by Representative Dukes of Austin, was introduced to affect industrialized housing and buildings, Chapter 1202 of the Occupations Code. The bill did not pass. Representative Dukes then offered an amendment to Senate Bill 2065 that would have accomplished the bill's purpose. The House adopted the amendment, but the Conference Committee for Senate Bill 2065 later removed that amendment. So current statute provides that industrialized housing and industrialized building do not include a structure that exceeds 4 stories or 60 feet in height. And the bill would have, and the amendment would have, increased maximum height limits to industrialized housing and an industrialized building, and specified that industrialized housing and industrialized building do not include a structure that exceeds 14 stories or 168 feet in height. During the session, we kept our stakeholders up to date on pending legislation on our website, tdlr.texas.gov, and encourage you to go look at the website, click on the Capitol picture, and you'll get a full review of what happened during the session, and bills by program are there and updated. We also want to encourage you guys to, in addition to following us on our website to keep up with TDLR news, is to also like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter if you're into that. And wanted to mention a few statistics on your website that wanted to share with you. In total, our TDLR website in 2016 attracted more than 9.5 million page views, and the Texas Industrialized Building Code Council website had a little over 49,000 page views during that same time. More recently, though, over the last 3 weeks, your site has averaged about 115 visitors a day, and 73% of those visitors access the site from a desktop computer, while 23% do so from a smartphone and 3% from a tablet. Compared to last year, the number of mobile users is starting to rise. So we're seeing that in other programs as well. The top reasons for visiting your site: registrant lists, forms, certification inspection program, FAQs, followed by laws and rules, and mandatory building codes. If there are no other questions, I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Foynes, thank you so much for the
Thank you.
update. Any questions or comments from council? Thank you again.
Thank you.
Compliance Division?
This presentation presentation that we're about to do starts on page 6 in your papers. Good afternoon. I'm Donna Lipke, Program Manager. Is this turned on? Okay. With the IHB program. Brian Ledbetter, who is a program specialist with the Compliance Division, will be assisting me today. At their last meeting, the council indicated that a review of how the IHB program works might be in order. We thought instead of presenting everything at once, we would break it down into small pieces, starting with certification inspections. Certification inspections are part of the compliance staff report for each meeting, and I hope this presentation will give you a better understanding of what we mean when we talk about them in the future. So why do we perform certification inspections? Well, first, we are verifying that the manufacturer is capable of producing code-compliant products in site-built construction. In site-built construction, projects have plan reviews performed by the local building authorities where different aspects of the building are constructed by people licensed to perform this work, such as AC contractors, electricians, and plumbers. And local authorities perform inspections at different phases of construction. Because there are no requirement for licensed trades in the modular program, the modular industry works differently. There are no requirements to use licensed people to construct in the plant, and there are no individual trade inspections like there are in site construction. Instead, because modular construction is conducted in a manufacturing atmosphere, every aspect of every unit is inspected by the manufacturer's internal compliance control department with periodic but routine oversight and inspections conducted by third-party inspection agencies. Because there are no requirement for licensed trades, the approved plans must also contain enough detail for the compliance control personnel to perform their inspections without having to rely too much on their code books. And because TDLR is the licensing authority, we must verify that the oversight of the people completing the construction is adequate to ensure code compliance, and that the people performing the inspections in the plant fully understand the requirements of the approved procedures. We do this first by performing 100% inspection of all phases of construction of one Texas unit or different phases of construction on multiple Texas units during the in-plant phase of the certification to ensure that they are code compliant and that the plant can produce a code compliant product. We also must verify that the manufacturer's compliance control program is functioning adequately and as designed. A compliance control program for any type of manufacturing consists of written and enforceable internal procedures that the manufacturer follows to ensure compliance to a standard or body of standards. In this case, it would be the mandatory building codes and the IHB law and rules. So how do we do that? There are several procedures that we evaluate during the inspections. First, we must know that the compliance control personnel have the authority to perform their jobs and can ensure code compliance. That is that their decisions can't be overridden by production personnel. We want to verify the compliance control personnel are following the approved procedures. If not, they may need to make changes in how they perform or changes in written procedures. Sometimes what they are actually doing in the plant is better than the written procedures. Okay. We must ensure that the compliance control personnel understand the written procedures and that the procedures are well defined and easy to follow. This is where the in the future part comes into play. We have been in plants where the personnel understand what they should be doing to comply with the written procedures, but it isn't clear to us. If we don't understand the procedures, then how can we be sure that future compliance control inspectors in that plant will understand them? We must ensure that the compliance control personnel are identifying any problems or deviations in construction from the approved plans and building codes and having those problems or deviations corrected.
Good afternoon. So what are the steps that need to be taken before the manufacturer begins the certification process? First, they must register as a manufacturer. To register, a manufacturer quite simply completes a two-page application and submits the application with the appropriate fee. Second, they must notify us of their choice of DRA and TPIA. Throughout the course of this presentation, you'll hear both Donna and I refer to these acronyms regularly, so it may help to know what they stand for. DRA stands for Design Review Agency, and TPIA stands for Third Party Inspection Agency. Currently, there are 9 approved DRAs and TPIAs that manufacturers can choose from. A manufacturer must choose at least one of these agencies for their design review and inspection needs. Third, manufacturers must submit plans and a compliance control manual for review and approval. The rule sections noted contain the minimum submittal requirements, but the DRA should ask for any documents necessary to verify compliance. A few examples of additional documents that might be required to show compliance are listing reports, engineering justification for non-prescriptive design, product manufacturer's installation instructions, and spec sheets. It should be noted that the compliance control program is commonly referred to as a QA or QC program by most people in the industry, and for ease of communication, we often use those terms as well. However, a compliance control program is actually a compilation of procedures followed to ensure that a product complies with applicable minimum standards. In this case, the mandatory building codes and the IHB law and rules. QA and QC programs, however, relate more to the procedure that a manufacturer will use to ensure that their clients receive a product that meets the client's specifications and needs. And finally, once the plans and manual are found to comply and are approved by the DRA, then the approved documents are forwarded to the manufacturer and TDLR for our certification oversight review. It should be noted, though, that TDLR does not approve plans, but we do an oversight review prior to the certification inspections.
So how are documents identified as approved by a DRA? Every page of approved documents must contain one of the stamps shown on this slide. The first image is the signature stamp, and it must be signed by the approved DRA manager. The approved DRA manager is the one who has met the criteria for approval as set by the council. The signature stamp can be used on all pages. However, its use is required on cover pages, table of content pages, and index pages. The second stamp is the alternate approval stamp. This stamp can be used. This stamp doesn't require the signature of the DRA manager, but it can't be used on cover pages, table of content pages, or index pages.
So, after a manufacturer has a set of DRA-approved documents, they can schedule a certification inspection. To schedule this inspection, they send us a written request where they indicate the date that they would like to start. The actual date scheduled will be a minimum of 2 weeks after we receive the request for certification and after we receive the approved plans and the manual from the DRA. It also depends on our availability. We determine if staff or other approved parties are available and what dates are open for their schedule. Our certification schedule operates on a first-come, first-served basis.
So who makes up the certification inspection team? Brian? The certification team generally consists of 2 people to start the inspection, a team leader and a qualified inspector. In some cases, depending on the size and complexity of the project, we may only have 1 person assigned to the inspection. In general, team members can't be employed by the manufacturer's DRA or TPIA. Team members from outside the department must meet the criteria found in the certification inspection program procedures that were approved by the council. For example, the criteria met by other qualified person acting as team leader requires that they cannot be employed by the manufacturer's DRA or TPIA. So we don't want the team leader to be associated with the manufacturer's direct third parties. They should have a minimum of 5 years experience inspecting or monitoring these programs in the modular industry with some experience in the Texas program required. And they have to possess the same certifications as required for third-party inspectors, plus meet the criteria for approval in one of the plan review areas outlined in the DRA criteria for approval. For other team members not employed by TDLR, the criteria includes that they should not be employed by the manufacturer's DRA or TPI, but if necessary, we will use an inspector from one of those agencies. They must be currently registered with TDLR and approved by the council as a third-party inspector. They should have been monitored one or more times by the IHB section and shown satisfactory performance in their duties, and they must be available for the duration of the inspection. Team members employed by the team members not employed by TDLR are required to complete a certification statement about what they can and cannot do as team members. For example, they can't solicit the manufacturer as a client for their agency during the certification process. They must implement policies of the council with regards to determination of the standards and interpretations of the mandatory building codes, and they represent the interests of TDLR and the council when acting as a team member.
The certification inspection team is tasked with auditing and verifying all the manufacturer's construction processes and compliance control procedures as they relate to the manufacture of IHB structures. The team leader directs all activities of the team, including determining manpower requirements, resolving problems, determining inspection. Oh, did you get
I'm
it?
having problems with that.
I'm going to start back over here at bullet point 1. The team leader directs all activities of the team, determining manpower requirements, resolving problems, determining inspection hold points, and answering questions about the inspection. The team evaluates the manufacturer's construction and compliance control processes by inspecting 100% of the construction of one Texas unit in different stages of construction. If inspection of multiple units in different phases of construction, the manufacturer is cautioned that a deviation or problem discovered on a...
I think council's following along here on the iPad, so keep going, Brian.
Okay. So basically, if a manufacturer has several units in production and we find a problem on one of them, the manufacturer becomes responsible for fixing any problems that may be already completed and covered up. Along with conducting normal building inspections, the team must become familiar with and verify the manufacturer's procedures, such as material control, receiving, disposition, and compliance verification, compliance control staff functions and their adequacy, and compliance control and production inspection procedures and their adequacy.
Before we begin the implant inspection portion of the process, we perform a pre-certification review of the approved design package. Design package is all the plans and QC manual and everything combined, so that the team becomes familiar with the project, the procedures, and is ready to go when they arrive at the plant. After our pre-certification review, we issue a report that is broken down into 2 parts. Part A of the report will focus on the compliance control manual, and Part B will focus on the plans. Just so you know, when we're certifying a plant, we're certifying the plant and we're certifying the units we inspect in the plant. So it's like 2 separate certifications go into the total sum of the certification for the plant. The report will identify compliance control procedures that were not clear or were lacking, construction documentation that is missing, cannot be found, or that doesn't appear to meet the codes, and potential problem areas that may be caused to postpone or delay the certification inspection. Potential problem areas could be any or all of the following: no steel mechanical properties found on the plans, welding and construction details are incomplete, no listing provided for alternate materials such as membrane roofing system or sandwich panels, products that are utilized outside the scope of their listing or product specs. We try to get this information before the team arrives at the plant. If they can't provide any of it, we may have to postpone. Okay, a copy of the report is then sent to the DRA and the manufacturer. All items on the report must be cleared before the manufacturer may be certified. We also ask the manufacturer for copies of pertinent documentation such as mill reports for the steel and welder certification documentation before the start of the in-plant inspection part of the process. These reviews are also used to monitor the performance of the DRAs and how they're doing in their job of review and plan approval.
So what happens during the in-plant portion of the certification inspection? I have to add, this is one of my favorite parts of the certification process. First item up is the entrance meeting, where the team will meet with the compliance control personnel, plant manager, or any other individual the manufacturer wishes to include in the meeting. During this meeting, the team discusses the certification inspection procedures, the purpose of the inspection, status of the Texas units in production, safety protocols, time frames for daily meetings, and other administrative functions. After the entrance meeting, the team requests a tour of the facility so that they may become familiar with the plant layout and identify any Texas units online. After the team is comfortable with the plant layout and has identified all the Texas units included in the inspection, they will begin the 100% inspection and compliance control verifications as we discussed earlier. The team documents their inspections daily and brings problems to the attention of the compliance control personnel as they are identified. The daily documentation is important information for the manufacturers to be conscious of because any violation or concern included on these reports must be corrected before any building can receive an IHB label or the plant can be certified. A daily inspection report, physical report, is prepared by each inspector for each day. It will include things such as a list of all units inspected that day, a description of tests witnessed that day, a list of deviations observed by the inspection team, including corrective actions that may have been witnessed, concerns and comments about the course of the inspection, concerns that still need to be reviewed, or a description of the work, definitely a description of the work inspected that day. At the end of each day or the beginning of the next day, the team reviews the progress of the inspection with the compliance control personnel. If construction will take more than a week to complete, or if there are corrective actions that could not be witnessed in the initial in-plant phase of the inspection, or if there were systematic failures of the compliance control program, or if the team determines that they must see additional units to gather the data needed to fully evaluate the facility, one or more team members may have to return to the facility to continue the inspection. If follow-up inspections are necessary, the team leader works with the plant to coordinate inspection dates that work best for everyone. And finally, the inspection concludes when all phases of construction have been witnessed, all corrective actions have been cleared, including amendments to the drawings or updates to the drawings, and the team has enough data to effectively evaluate the adequacy of the manufacturer's compliance control program.
So what happens after the inspection? Well, after each trip, a report is prepared that evaluates the progress of the inspection to that date and sent to the plant and the DRA. The report will include all deviations to date that haven't been cleared, including any from the pre-certification review. The report may describe revisions that the plant has reviewed but which haven't yet been added to the approved design package. Items will be cleared once approved by the DRA. The report will show those deviations that have been cleared. This means the inspection team has accepted the corrective action taken in plant or the approved revisions to the design package. The report may also include observations about how the inspection is progressing and recommendations for improvements. The plant generally has 6 months to clear all deviations and meet requirements. This is 6 months from the last in-plant inspection performed by the team. The last in-plant inspection performed by the team may not happen on the first unit constructed for certification. In some cases, we may need to go back and see additional units, or the compliance control program may not have been adequately functioning when the process first started, or there may have been major problems with code compliance. So the 6 months is not a hard and fast rule. A non-compliance report will be issued at the end of this time if there are still outstanding deviations or problems. Certification report is issued if all requirements have been met and all deviations have been cleared. However, conditions may be placed on the certification. For example, if the building inspected for certification did not include plumbing systems, then the manufacturer is not certified for construction that includes plumbing and will need to contact us about witnessing that construction on the first building that contains plumbing systems. In those cases, we may do the inspection or we may have their third-party inspection agency do the inspections and report back to us.
As discussed earlier in this presentation, the certification actually consists of two certifications, one of the Texas units in production and one of the adequacy of the manufacturer's compliance control program. I believe that is very important to remember. Certification labels are generally released when both of those have been certified. However, there are instances when the manufacturer may receive an IHB certification label prior to the certification of the manufacturer's compliance control program. The following conditions must be met for certification labels to be released prior to the certification of the manufacturer's compliance control program. The team must find that all units constructed for certification have met all the code requirements. All inspection fees have been paid to both TDLR and any third-party inspection agencies that may have been involved. And the manufacturer must also provide us the registration number for the industrialized builder or installation permit holder receiving the buildings or components.
And that is all we have for you on this. If you have any questions, we're willing to answer those. Hopefully next time we do this, we'll be a little bit more ready for the system. So.
Donna, thank you. Council, any questions? How long does a in-plant certification inspection take? Is this days, weeks?
It could take days or weeks. It depends on what they're building. If we're looking at a steel building, it may take a couple of months or more because we might have to go back because the construction's a lot slower. And we need to see all phases of construction.
How many staff does your program have that is available to go out to do in-plant inspections?
We have two that are available pretty much full-time for that, plus Brian. Brian does more of the complaint inspections, but he can also do certification inspections. And then there's another program specialist, Carmen Marshall. She works primarily with the elevator program right now, but she could also assist us. We use a lot of third parties to assist us in these inspections.
Council? Donna, thank you. Moving on to, if council would allow, I'd like to recognize, find my roll sheet here, Mr. Dubsmith. If you'll indicate your presence.
I'm here.
Mr. Scott McDonald.
Present, sir.
Thank you for joining us. For the record, I am scratching out Mr. Dubsmith as being absent and initializing that he's joining us, as well as Mr. Scott McDonald on roll. And Tamla, this is available for you.
Thank you. We should notify TxDOT of their paving plans on MoPac.
I'm
Or have
sure
them
the word will
notify-
get to him.
Have them notify us so we can put a 2-hour lead time for a 1-hour trip.
Understood. Moving on to agenda item 2B, legislative updates for the IHB program, Donna.
Looks like I forgot my notes. As Nick told you earlier, there was a bill out there that would have increased the height limitations for a modular program. There was also a possibility of another amendment that was being considered that would have exempted these, thank you, that would have exempted the these equipment buildings that are going to be on a secured site, they would have been exempted from the program. Right now, they're not. So it's possible these amendments may become part of the statute at some point. If the amendment increasing the height limitations for the program is passed, then the council may want to consider revising the plan review criteria for approval of DRAs. The current criteria was developed around the idea that the program consisted of 1 and 2 family housing and small commercial buildings, no more than 3 stories or 49 feet in height. However, an increase in the height limitations to 168 feet means that the program would also cover high-rise buildings that must meet more stringent and complex code requirements. The IBC defines a high-rise building as a building with an occupied floor located more than 75 feet above the lowest level of fire department vehicle access. Currently, the plan reviewer criteria requires inspector certifications for mechanical, plumbing, and electrical areas of plan review. This was approved when the mandatory building codes were the uniform codes and the standard codes. However, the standard code organization at that time did not have plan reviewer certifications for mechanical, plumbing, and electrical. So the council decided to use inspector certifications as the applicable criteria in those areas of plan review. More important than those areas, however, is the criteria for approval of the fire safety reviewer. The current criteria requires certification as a building plans examiner through ICC. ICC, however, also offers certification as a fire plans examiner, and the council, as a minimum, may wish to consider changing the criteria to require certification for a fire safety reviewer if the height limitations are ever increased. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's just that when you get to the taller buildings, the code requirements become more complex. Any questions on any of that?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'd like to ask if you could share with us the definition that was used for equipment buildings.
I'm sorry, Mary Winston, attorney, TDLR. Mr. Brown, when you, we request, we love your input. Make sure you just introduce yourself
Right.
for those out there watching.
I apologize.
Thank
This is
you.
Roland Brown. Thank you.
I don't have that text in front of me, but it was just saying if it's used for a building like that's going to be at a chemical plant or something like that, an industrial application, and it was a secured building, in other words, you have to go through security to get to it, then it would be exempted from the program.
Secured site. then.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So. I'm going to go back over here because I need to pull something up. It's turned off. Is it working? Yeah. Okay. Okay, as you know, the last meeting, the council approved adoption of the 2015 codes. The codes were finally proposed in November of 2016 in the Texas Register. They were approved by the commission on January 29th, I believe, of this year, with an effective date of August 1st. Notice was sent out to all registrants and the public about the change on January 31st. This is our website where you can find information about the adoption. If you have any questions or you want me to go over that, I can. But it's all out here on the website.
I have a question, Dub Smith. What code are we what fire code?
It'd be the 2015
It would
fire
be the
code.
15 that
Yeah.
we comply with? Okay.
Since that's what's referenced in the building code.
Are we having any conflicts between counties or ESDs that adopt their own fire codes?
Well, basically, the law says that our code controls for modular buildings. So there may be some conflicts out there.
But it's to the higher level.
Mhm. Any other questions?
This is Rolando Rubiano. In terms of the same discussion, so buildings sold along the Texas coast that the owner would like to get a windstorm certification through the Texas Department of Insurance windstorm program, those buildings must be found to be compliant with the 2006 IBC.
Right. And our amendments say that they have to comply with whichever is more stringent, the 2015 or 2006, in order to get approval for TDI, but they still have to have TDI inspections of the construction. Those are separate from our inspections.
So in terms of your document review or your design review agencies, are they familiar with that? And are you seeing documents indicating on the compliance document saying the greater of the two codes, or what? How is that being identified?
I'm not really sure. If maybe some of my people can answer that question. They see more of the plans coming in. Mark or Brian or Kelly?
Brian, they're not gonna be able to hear you. Get to that microphone. David says.
Most of the plans that we see come in designed to the code cycle that they're on. So I don't know that it really makes the distinction between
I do know some of the engineers out there do the plans for the high wind areas. They're also TDI inspectors. So.
Thank you. Donna, did that cover agenda items 2A, B, and C?
Yes.
Report on adoption of new code additions?
Yes, it did.
And in terms of the final, or the latest item, 2C, have you had any concerns over the air tightness requirements of the new energy code? Has anybody communicated any concerns from?
We've heard some comments about they're not sure if they can meet it, but most of the problems on the housing side are because of the installation, not the actual house itself that was built in the factory, because they don't always do proper sealing of the sections, the connections between houses. They don't do the ducts properly, or they don't seal up underneath the house. Those are things they're going to have to do better in the future.
Has your staff adopted a procedure for asking for that verification of the air tightness requirement of new construction?
We will be updating the inspection reports to require a report on that, which is what the code requires, that a report be submitted to the building official.
That report in terms of the air tightness, correct?
Yes.
Would that report come from a individual with a certain level of qualifications?
There are no requirements in the code for that unless the council wishes to adopt some standards for that. At this point, that hasn't happened, so. I mean, there are different agencies out there like HERS that does that sort of testing.
Is there a design standard, an ASTM standard that they should be following? At what point does do we?
There are standards in the code. The energy code lists the standards that are supposed to be met for that test.
Yes, Mr. Brown.
Roland Brown. Donna, in this, I see it as a twofold item. One, what happens in the factory, which would be part of what's on the approved plans and what's in the quality assurance procedures. But then when it gets to the field, the big activity happens. We've got to zip it up, seal everything up, and then perform a test. But that's under local jurisdiction at that point in time. So how is the department viewing the difference between the activities within the manufacturing facility and the activities in the field. In an area, let's take an example. This is not a rural area. This is an area where they do have a permit department.
Then it would be up to the building inspection department for that locality to require that. We don't do oversight of the cities, what they're requiring. If there's a complaint, then we might get into that.
Thank you.
Council, anything else? Donna, thank you. Moving on to compliance, agenda item 2. Anything else on items D or E?
And page 18 in your meeting materials is a list of the manufacturers that were certified since the last meeting, and it also gives a list of the ongoing certification inspections. As we explained in our presentation, there could be a lot of reasons why these plants aren't certified yet, including the fact that we need to see additional units or their compliance control procedures were not functioning very effectively when we were in the plant. So there's a number of reasons why they're not certified yet. A couple of them, casita operations and parkline buildings, we just started those in May, and especially casita, they're kind of slow at this point because they're new.
Legacy housing.
Casita.
Welcome. Let's see, Legacy Housing, IHM-444. It's almost a year. It's been 9 months, I think, in the process. Is that correct?
Let's see, where's Legacy Housing?
Okay, I see. It took 9 months to get certified.
Yeah.
Number 7 on the list, okay.
Yeah. So like we said in the inspection, sometimes they get their buildings completed correctly, but they have changes in their procedures that need to be revised and approved, and they drag their feet on those at times. So that could be why that took so long.
Mr. Chairman, question?
Yes, Mr.
Dub Smith. How many of the new permittees are tiny house manufacturers? If we can
Casita.
call it that. Casita's it?
Yeah. We do have another one that's coming up, I think, but they haven't even had plans approved yet.
Well, along that line, it seems to me there's a great many of these tiny house builders that probably are not regulated, or are regulated, but are not licensed. How are we reaching out to those folks and ensuring they attempt to comply with code?
When we know about them, we do. A lot of them tell us they're not being installed on a permanent foundation, though, and that's how they get out of it. So.
Mr. Smith, can you help us understand the topic a little bit for tiny houses?
It's the new rage of homes under, I don't know, 400 feet. Essentially, a hybrid of a home on wheels or a home they bring out and drop and put on pier and beam foundation, the old standard block and pad foundation. It seems to me the modular home that we regulate is no different than that.
Mhm.
In terms of, you're living, by definition, you're producing a single-family residence for a permanent residence, whether it's a weekend home, cabin, casita, cargo container turned into a single-family residence. It's the same concept, at least from a real estate
Right.
valuation and lending perspective.
The way our law reads is that it's not a modular industrialized house unless it's placed on a permanent foundation tied permanently to the property. They've been telling us putting these, they're not actually anchoring it to that foundation, so that doesn't become permanent in that case.
I see a conflict there because I could take, as a modular builder, I can take those two pieces from a manufacturer, put them on pier and beam on pads, just like an FHA trailer. Don't tie them down. Breed them back together, rebuild them, tie them there, and they may not blow away until
There's some
the
problem.
tornado hits.
Yeah.
But then how many millions of homes do we have in Cameron County or down in the valley and in West Texas that aren't attached to the ground permanently either? So the question is does it wag its tail like a dog? Maybe it's a dog and you're saying it's not a dog.
Well, it's based on what's in our law, we have to go by. So, commercial buildings under 1,500 square feet aren't covered under our law if they're not permanently attached. Housing has to be on a permanent foundation, has to be
What's the
anchored.
trigger?
So unless somebody complains about somebody, that somebody's actually taking these and permanently attaching them to a foundation, a pier and beam foundation system, then if we don't know about them, we can't do anything about it.
Well, and I guess the way that we ensure the modular home gets installed properly is you have to be a licensed modular builder
Mhm.
to even buy the structure from the manufacturer.
Correct.
So that's the trick. Yeah. So if you're willing to site build or stick build your building on your lot, your office lot, let's say, or at your plant, and then move it, that you don't have to have a license to do that. And we haven't put any rules in place to do that.
No, and there's also an exemption in the law for what they call ready-built housing, which is built in one section. Those could be installed permanently. If they're not built in a manufacturing facility, they don't have to fall under us.
Well, I remember some years back we talked about that.
Yeah.
Because of
That was,
Lubbock and-
I think that was, these houses were being built, I think primarily in Lubbock at the time at these lumber yards. And they got themselves exempted from the law. So as long as they're in one section, they're exempt.
As long as it's not multiple farms.
Yes.
Council, anything further? Donna, thank you.
There's also, under projects, there's the builder audits. I don't have a lot of information on that. Catherine handles those, and she's not here today, but I can find answers, I guess, if you have questions on the builder audits. It's on page 20.
Are we finding any consistency in our audit findings? Any one particular item or any?
The major issue is they're not getting the inspections that are required a lot. That's the thing we see the most, is they don't get that final inspection completed like they're required to do. And they're allowing occupation of the house before that inspection happens. Of course, if it's inside city limits, then it's up to the city. So the city controls that. But if it's outside city limits, that's where we find problems like that.
Donna, remind me again, RES units, RES is?
REF?
RES?
Oh, residential,
Okay.
residential
Oh,
units,
I was
yeah.
thinking of the REF, the.
No, this is just residential and commercial units.
Okay.
Chairman, one question, if I might.
Yes, of course,
Dr.
Mr.
Smith,
Smith.
how have you been getting, or how have we been getting along with municipalities in their, you know, I had a personal event with the city of Austin wanting to inspect a modular structure. It's been a few years ago. I just
For
wondered.
the most part, we haven't had any problems with the cities.
Haven't not seen that.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about, though. That was the energy side, and I hear a lot of people complain about that.
That's before I was on the board, and you and I had a whole lot of conversations about it,
Mhm.
because they were wanting to inspect plumbing and HVAC, and they didn't know what it
And they know,
was.
and they know better. So,
Well,
but, yeah.
it is the city of Austin.
So,
Anything else, council? All right, thank you.
okay, Part E, we haven't covered that. If you have, there's some statistics there. If you have questions about it, I can answer them. It starts on page 21 and goes to page 23. One thing on page 21, the number of units constructed by type, under modular components, I didn't have that information at the time for fiscal year 16 and 17. I know for 17, to date, it's 300 modular components, and it was 200 and something for fiscal year 16. We're getting more modular components under the program, mostly bathroom units, things that go into hospitals and clinics, that sort of thing. And like sink walls that are closed construction that go into a hospital. That's what we're seeing right now. We also have a manufacturer that's building these, they're basically like ice buildings for getting ice and water from. They build the base and they build the roof, and they ship those separately, so we're licensing the roofs as components. Any questions on anything else?
Council? Donna, thank you. Moving on to agenda item D3, staff reports for Enforcement Division.
Good afternoon. I'm Dawn Burton. I'm a new prosecutor in the Enforcement Division, and I'm providing the staff report today while Virginia's out of the office.
Welcome, Donna. Is that Donna?
Dawn, D-A-W-N,
Dawn.
Burton,
Thank you.
B-U-R-T-O-N. I'm going to go in reverse order from what you have on your agenda. I want to talk about the highlights first, case highlights. It says that these are selected highlights, but since your last meeting, in fiscal year so far, 2017 as of April, there have only been 3 orders issued. So I'm going to talk about each of those. And before I begin that, I want to recap briefly the enforcement process. Thank you. The enforcement process. When a case comes to prosecution, the prosecutor can close a case with a closing letter or a warning letter under particular circumstances, or can issue a notice of alleged violation. The notice of alleged violation is issued to the respondent and informs the respondent about the allegations, the department's action, and also includes a proposed settlement. After the notice of alleged violation is issued, the case can be closed with an order with one of 3 types of orders. A default order is issued when the respondent does not respond to the notice of alleged violation. An agreed order is issued when the case is settled. The department and respondent reach a settlement agreement. And a final order is issued by the commission after a hearing on the merits at the State Office of Administrative Hearing. The orders that we have today are 1 default order and 2 agreed orders. In the case of Melinda Reed and Academy Management Services, this is a case that was closed with a default order in December. The respondent had violated building codes and record-keeping requirements. Since then, the respondent has gone out of business and has not renewed the license. So this respondent did not respond to our notice of alleged violation, and the department issued a default order on this case. As of this time, the penalty has not been collected, but as of last week, just very recently, the respondent did contact the department, so we are currently talking about the order and possible payment of that amount that's outstanding. There are 2 cases that involve CMH Homes doing business as Clayton Homes, one in Fort Worth and one in Austin, one location in Fort Worth. The case in Fort Worth, from the time that the notice of alleged violation was issued and after the respondent paid the amount in full and an agreed order was issued, that was 49 days from the NOAV to the signature on the agreed order. And that amount, again, was paid in full. That was the case in Fort Worth. For CMA Homes doing business as Clayton Homes in Austin, this was a much larger case. This case involved 3 technical violations and a contract violation. This case was settled as well, and the respondent paid the administrative penalty, so that was paid in full. Do you have any questions about the case highlights before I go on to the statistics?
Don, the individuals that reach an agreed order and as well as the ones that don't respond, is there communication back from your group to the IHB board or the IHB staff so that when recertification comes up, there is an awareness of these previous concerns?
Yes, we have an excellent database system, and all of this information is available. I don't know specifically how that is communicated, but I do know that licensing is aware of when there has been a case against a facility, and I'm not sure.
Donna?
I don't think that one's on. Wanna sit over here? Come over here. Yeah.
There currently isn't any way in our database to tag people. I mean, we try to tag them. The problem is we do have builders that there's cases of, they go out of business, they come back as somebody else, so there's really no way to track those ones. The big ones like Clayton Homes or Palm Harbor, Oak Creek, they're usually a lot easier to track. It's the small ones that are the ones we have problems with.
Thank you.
And I will say also that the Enforcement Division, when the situation happens as she described, where they have gone out of business, they've no longer kept their license current, and they try to apply for a new license, there isn't a way right now really to address that it's considered a new licensee. It's not considered the same licensee. So when I receive a case and I look in the database to see if there's a case against that individual, it's a different license, so it does not, in terms of proceeding with an enforcement case, it's not the same as if the person had renewed the license, continued to be licensed, and violated again and brought a new case to prosecution.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Larry
Yes.
Wilkinson. I realize that TDLNR is involved in regards to licensing a lot of different industries, activities. Is it common that an entity such as an IHB builder or manufacturer doesn't have a bond on the license, whereas other entities that you regulate, hairdressers, for example, any of those do have bonds? Is the IHB is the only one that doesn't have a bond on their license?
I regret to say I'm too new to be able to answer that question, but I can find that out for you.
Mary Winston, attorney, TDLR. This is not the only profession that does not have a bond. Whereas I know, actually Donna is aware of probably all the bad actors. She knows this backwards and forwards. We do have situations where, as you know, a licensed entity is that entity, and they register, and you may find out later that, oh, this is Joe Blow of Tiny Home Builder. We weren't aware of. Most of the IHB licensees, like Clayton Homes, some of the ones that Donna mentioned, they're not going to play fast and loose, shall we say, because they're registered correctly, they're paying the penalties. We do have smaller ones, such as the one mentioned here, that actually came back and is wanting to get another license, or up the license, or renew, or there would be some reason why that person would be coming back to inquire about an order that they have defaulted on and never paid. So, no, this is not the only one that doesn't have the bond, but there are other ways that we do discover that it's the same company or so forth. But Don is correct. If we get a new complaint in enforcement and they have another name, we would not connect, and another license number, we would not connect those dots. It doesn't, eventually it typically comes out later, but it's a good thing it doesn't happen very regularly in IHB, but there is that possibility.
And generally too, the ones that are gonna do that, when they come back, they're gonna have different officers, so that's another reason they don't get caught. If they register and they have the same points of contact, we become aware of it. But if they don't, it's not until there's a complaint, and then all of a sudden we find out that this person is really a player in this complaint. That's when we find out that they had problems before.
So they have to, Mary Winston again, sort of run a subterfuge to avoid being discovered. Not that some don't, but typically, like Donna said, she's gonna be aware, we're gonna be aware of those members unless they change completely, and then that would be harder to discover.
Chairman,
But you're,
question.
Larry Williams, about what you're saying, it's a minimal percentage of activities in this IHB program.
That we are aware of.
Yes, that we are aware of.
As far as we know, the complaints that we get, what we are aware of, and, you know, Texas is a big state. And we do the best we can, and we do the best we can to say, file a complaint, make us aware. We want to be on this, we want to help you. But it's not a large number.
Mr. Smith?
Dub Smith, quick question. How do you, what legal tools do we have to collect those fees and those fines? Do we file judgments? Do we, how do we pursue collecting the money?
There are 2 avenues that I'm aware of. One is we do try to work with the person through the Office of General Counsel, and at times we also refer cases to the Attorney General for collection.
Okay. One other question, if I might, Dub Smith. What was the contract issue in the third case here?
The respondent used a contract that was not for this program. So it didn't include foundation requirements, and it didn't include information about the department, contact information. It's not clear why they used this contract because it didn't have our name on it, but that was the contract issue.
And this is Donna Lipke. I can provide some clarification. What they used was a manufactured housing document that was meant for HUD code manufactured housing, instead of a document that should have had our contact information on it.
So they were both the wholesaler, they were the retailer on this and the installer.
Yes, and
on
they
someone
do
else's
both.
land.
They do both things. They do
Right.
manufactured housing and they do modular.
The reason I ask, just being a real estate broker also, I see these and I'm trying to make sure that we're, because there's a modular box on a 1-to-4 family real estate contract, and I see many times that's not checked when I'm involved.
Yeah, we don't have any control over those documents, so, which I'm kind of glad we don't, but.
So this was essentially the purchase contract like you would buy, a chattel
Yes.
contract like buying a car, but it's yes,
Yes.
I understand. Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
Counsel, anything further?
Okay. There are only 2 items about the statistics that I'd like to bring to your attention. The first is that it shows that 10 cases were opened and 10 cases were closed. This movement of the cases, this highlights the Enforcement Division's goal to promptly process the cases. And in the second item, I wanted to also point out the amount that's collected, that's lower. It's the $17,000 from the Reed default case. And as I mentioned, that case is still being talked about. It's just recently being talked about with the respondent. So it's still possible that that amount may be collected. Did you have any other questions about the statistics?
Mr. Chairman, Larry Wilkinson, does that, on that $17,000, does that entity have a manufactured housing license in the state of Texas?
No, it expired in 2015, and it has not been renewed. That business has gone out of business.
Thank you.
And I'm available for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Burke.
Thank you.
Moving on to agenda item D4, Licensing Division, licensing statistics.
Good afternoon, Chairman and board members. My name is Chloe Whalen, Licensing Manager. Before you is the statistic report. I would also like to update you that the recent applications that we have received have been processed and issued out. I would also like to take this opportunity to remind you and those listening that when you have a change in staff that handles your renewals, we found recently that we've gotten quite a few emails that they can't find the renewal because the person that handled it before is no longer with the company. So if you'll let us know who your new contact person is, send us a notification in writing. We can update the system and so that you can receive your renewal and get it in, and when you won't have to panic when you can't find it. Other than that, that's all I have for you.
Council, any questions? Chloe, thank you.
Thank you.
We're moving through the agenda. We're at agenda item E, discussion of rule review process and suggestions for potential future rulemaking, including possible action to form work groups to recommend amendments to 16 Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 70. Donna? Oh. Or not Donna, excuse me.
My name is Laura Pefferly, and I'm with the Office of General Counsel. And I'm just going to give you the high view picture of the rulemaking process where we are right now on regarding rules. You have a handout, and I'm going to use the same thing to just kind of hit the highlights here. Right now, the code rule changes are
Laura, give us a moment. Excuse
Sure.
me for interrupting you. We're
yeah, it's the two-page diagram.
and we're all going to grab our iPads and turn sideways. No, that didn't work. It's on page 31. Okay. Ours are.
Formatting issue?
Yes. Or neck issue. Go ahead, Lloyd.
Everybody lean.
Council, anybody need additional help? I think we're gonna do well.
And you really, you don't really need to read along with it if you don't want
Okay.
to. I'll
Go ahead.
just hit the highlights. Right now, the code rule changes are waiting to become effective because, of course, they can't become effective until 6 months after they're adopted. And so that those become effective August 1st. And then the other rulemaking action is the review every 4 years of the rules. This is something required by the government code, that all the agency rules are reviewed every 4 years to see if they're still necessary, if they should be repealed, if they should be amended. And so we, at TDLR, we break that up into 2 phases. The rules are, there's a notice published that the rules are going to be reviewed, and there's a comment period, and then they're either readopted or repealed, or they're scheduled to go to a phase 2 for amendment. In this case, the notice was published, there was a comment period, received 2 comments, and then the rules were readopted as is. And so now the council can decide whether to proceed with a rulemaking now or later. The rulemaking, which we'd call the phase 2 of that review, but which looks like any other rulemaking, would be to look at the rules, decide if you want to do any changes, look at those 2 comments that came in, decide if you want to do any changes based on those. If we had statutory changes to implement, could do that in the same rulemaking. Your diagram shows the start of the process, and there are 3 ways usually that a rulemaking will start, and that is with a statute change as part of phase 2 of the rule review, if there are comments or changes that came up during that rule review process, or there's just a need to change the rules. There could be a change in the industry or something, and you need to change them. But all those sorts of changes, when possible, are just wrapped into the same rulemaking to basically be more efficient. So at this point, you're going to get the comments that came in during the rule review. You may or may not decide you want to do any changes to the rules based on those. You may decide you have other changes you'd like to make independent of those. You don't really have any statutory changes of significance that would affect IHB, but that's something that we'd look at. But if you did want to implement rulemaking now or later, then you'd want to start getting public input. So there would be notices going out that the rules were under consideration for changes. We'd obviously be getting your input. The agency staff and the general counsel's office, of which I'm part, would be drafting and preparing those rules and dealing with the comment that would come in. So the initial phase is usually the longest part, getting all the changes organized, deciding what changes to make, and then eventually there's going to be a draft rule ready for your review, and so then it would come to you for you to agree that you want to go forward with it. It's going to be going to the to publication in the Texas Register, for a proposal, for a formal proposal, and then there's a formal comment period, and then all the comments on that proposed rule are addressed and responded to in the at the adoption, but you would be giving input on those comments and any changes that needed to be made to that proposed rule based on those comments. Each time you meet, of course, there's a public comment session. You might get comment during a public meeting as well. When you're satisfied with them, then they go to the commission, and the commission, of course, has a public comment period as well in their meeting when they're deciding whether to agree, with the adoption of that rule. And they could, make changes to the rule. There could be comment at that point. Couldn't really make a whole lot of changes, at that point, but and the public comment at that meeting, there wouldn't be time to respond to that formally like there is during the earlier stages. But essentially, when the commission approves them to be adopted, then they'd be published, and then they'd become effective depending on, when we set them to be become effective. Right now, if you're deliberating about whether to make changes, you'll see the comments from that phase 1 rule review. You'll if there are other changes that you think are necessary, you can discuss that and decide whether you want to do a rulemaking. If you're wanting to assign work groups to look at it, then that's another option you can do. You can assign 2, 3, 4, however many members you want, less than a quorum of your group, but a smaller group to maybe look at certain issues so that those can be examined without doing it during your public meetings. It's a little more efficient if a group of you can look at an issue in depth in a work group, and you don't have to meet in public. You can communicate informally by email, and it's just a more efficient way to look at the rules to decide whether you want to do a rulemaking. So that's something that you could consider. If you don't have any particular pressing issues you want to, initiate a rulemaking about it, it can, there's no deadline. You don't have to start one just because we have comments from that rule review, but you'll want to look at those and see whether you think anything's necessary. And then, if you feel like that's what you want to do, then the staff and general counsel help you through that. So it's kind of just the overview. You can see all the stages in your diagram there. But if you do want to appoint work groups, that would be something that you would want to do in the meeting and vote on that and do that as a formal action. And if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Laura, thank you. Mr. Brown?
Roland Brown, if we form a committee, how does that work with the Open Meetings Act that we're also sensitive about? Is a certain process we need to go through to make sure that we do not be in conflict with the Open Meetings Act?
The main thing is it needs to have less members than a quorum of your board. So you definitely want to stay at 4 or 5 members, where you're not going to have any problem with having a quorum of the whole board. As long as there are less members involved in that committee or work group, whatever you want to call it, then they can meet informally. The Open Meetings Act doesn't apply to committees and work groups. Now, you'd be coordinating with agency staff to set up meeting rooms and or teleconferences, which are perfectly fine. You can circulate drafts. You don't have to worry about the Open Meetings Act requirements because you're not a quorum. You still don't want to get into large board issues, and you don't want to have what they call a walking quorum, where you talk about things in the committee and then you start talking to the other members, and then it becomes an issue of, is the board actually deliberating? So you just keep the discussion and the work within that committee, and then when you have a public meeting like this, then you can all talk about everything that you've been covering in that committee. You just don't want to have communications going with the whole board or a quorum of the board.
Laura, Rolando Rubiano, if we break up our rule review process into several ad hoc committees with members, individual members either being on one or more of those ad hoc committees, but any one of the ad hoc committees does not meet the quorum levels, is that okay?
Yeah, you can have multiple committees to look at different aspects of things, or different rule sections, or however you want to divide up that work, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman. Go ahead, Mr.
Randy
Childers.
Childers. So I take it this item is on the agenda because we're at the 4-year mark? Is that why is this on the agenda?
Well, we did do the phase 1, and that was very recent. That was like, it started at the end of last year, and so that first phase of that, where the rules were readopted as is, that just concluded. And like I said, there's no deadline where you have to start a phase 2. If you don't feel like a rulemaking is necessary, you don't have to start one. The next time a rulemaking is done, whenever that is, those 2 comments from that rule review will be addressed then, but you're not obligated to do a rulemaking for, the second phase, as I've called it, unless you feel like you need or want to do one. And you can assign work groups to decide whether you want to go ahead with any kind of rule changes. And you aren't limited to what those comments were about. You can, if you feel like a rule change is necessary, any part of the rules is subject to amendment, so you're not limited.
Laura, thank you. Staff, is there a recommendation from staff, any particular discussion that you'd like to bring to bear in terms of our current rule? And our current rule, if I may, is Chapter 70 of 16 Texas.
And you should all have a hard copy of it there. I made sure you have that. So I think the first 8 pages is the actual law, and then the table of contents for the rules is on the next page after page 8, I believe. Yeah.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr.
Scott McDonald. Just so question to the action that we took on the rulemaking, which was to adopt the 2015 as the standards. Are those now have to be incorporated into this document, correct?
They will be incorporated as of August 1st.
August 1st?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
There are some rules that we would like to see some changes in, like 7070 and 7074.
Donna, would you give me a moment, just
Okay.
for council's sake? Would you mind holding up or having staff just make sure everybody knows that
It's-
there's this table of contents, and I'm sure if you have not found it yet. Yeah, if staff could kind of just guide us, keeping us to the table of contents and giving us your ideas of what portion of the rules, and in a moment, I don't know if anybody has signed up for public comment to discuss this action item. If there was, then after staff gives us some points of discussion, I'd like to see if there's any public comment to that effect. But go ahead, please.
Okay, but there's, you and I discussed this, I believe yesterday on some of this. There may be some changes. We probably need to make some changes to the 70-20 sections on registrations. Most of those are for tightening up some of the items that are a little bit too loose, especially when we have somebody declare bankruptcy and come back as a different entity. We need to define that better in our rules. And then 70-70, the 70-70s, there's some changes there that we need to make, like in 70-70 having to do with the documents that are submitted and approved. And 70-74 has to do with alterations to commercial buildings primarily. I think that needs to be looked at. We can maybe streamline that some. It may be a little bit too complicated the way it is.
Anything else?
That's really all I have right now.
To counsel those that are in this industry, and whether it's from the manufacturing side, sales side, or from the installation side, is there any parts of our rules, this Chapter 70 section of the rules, that has been of particular need for clarification or change?
Roland Brown, speaking on the commercial side, no, not that I'm aware of.
Counsel? Is there any public comment signed up for this item? Whether from the other members of the industry that might be in the public, or anybody else that has a question or a comment? Thank you. Yes, ma'am. I thought you were going to.
Oh, well, I was just gonna say, there's a public comment section on the agenda, but if you want to accept any comments on the rulemaking issue at this point, you can certainly do that if you want to open it.
Roland
you.
Brown,
Yes,
I would suggest, if there are items that we want to modify, I'd love for us to be able to address it in 6 months and not wait for another year.
I tried for 6 months. I couldn't get enough people to respond.
I apologize. I'm on your side there, but I would prefer not to put it off.
So, and then I had knee surgery, so that just kind of put everything out. So,
No more knee surgery.
I hope not.
Well, if you're feeling constrained by having to do all your business in these meetings, that's a good reason to assign work groups or committees so they can work in between the meetings, you know.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. McDonald.
Scott McDonald, if in fact that staff is making a recommendation to look at those 3 sections, that was 70-20, 24?
70-20 and 70-21, 70-70 and 70-74 in particular.
If that is the case, I might recommend that perhaps we do at least assign some subcommittees to evaluate those sections, get feedback, and then at least at our next meeting, we could make recommendation as to whether to make changes or make no changes aligned with that.
And I know Doug Robinson isn't here today, but he should be on the work group for 70-74, because that's he deals a lot with recertification of buildings, so I think he should be part of that. I'm pretty sure he would.
You'll never miss another meeting again. What else do we want to put Doug on?
I'm pretty sure he's happy.
What else did he volunteer for?
He usually volunteers for that stuff, so.
Oh, I'm sure, no problem. So, council, the agenda item is discussion of rule review process and suggestions for potential future rulemaking, including possible action to form work groups. Mr. McDonald has provided comment, if not a motion, to potentially break up into at least 1, if not 2, working groups to review the items that staff has mentioned. I continue to want to not create too big of an elephant to eat here, but I'd rather not limit through council action the review of the remainder of the rule. Should industry have specific comments beyond what has been brought to bear
Yeah,
by
I wouldn't
staff?
limit what the work group is working on either. I mean, their industry may have some ideas, things they want to be worked on that they can bring to our attention, just by an email or something, so.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
If I might make a motion, that we form a singular work group to evaluate the rules to see if there's anything that should be brought forward. Mr. Robinson could chair such committee. And, ultimately look at the rules overall, specifically to look at those 4 sections as staff has indicated, and bring back any recommendation to the group for further study.
Council, I have a motion by Mr. Scott McDonald to form a singular ad hoc committee to review the rules with staff and come back to council with recommendations, if any, for changes. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Brown. Okay, any further discussion from council? I'm assuming we need to approve that before we actually form the ad hoc committee.
I'm guessing yes.
Okay, well then, all in favor of the council forming a singular ad hoc committee to review the IHB rule, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Can we continue on that item E to invite people of the council to form the ad hoc committee now?
Yes.
Yeah, you'd need to appoint or, get volunteers. You need to clarify.
And
who
I'd
the
like to
members
see
will
at
be.
least one code person on there too. This is Randy's chance to get back at Scott.
I would suggest to council that they start speaking up before volunteering by Donna is rampant. But currently, we have it chaired by Mr. Doug Robinson. Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Mr. Randy Childress, you've been requested to see if you could participate in the ad hoc committee.
Well, I thought he might want to nominate Scott since Scott.
Oh, I misunderstood.
Scott
It was
nominated him
Scott.
last time.
Oh.
Councilmember Childers is, through the chair, would like to nominate Councilmember McDonald to serve on this.
Mr. McDonald, you're gratefully thanked for volunteering. Let me, we're absolutely moving forward, and I appreciate, I do want to take a slight deviation just to enter into the discussion. I guess a point of reference to the entire council and to the commission. We continue to serve and it's our great honor to serve the governor and the state of Texas. But I believe all of us on this council currently have expired commissions or whatever the term might be. And so we're not entirely sure. We will continue to serve until replaced by the governor's office or unless we present a voluntary resignation. So I just would like to indicate to staff, to the record, and to all council members that we're looking at a rule review process that could take some time, hopefully not more than 6 months, but we are in a stage of potential not being on the council any further. So to that end, I'm wondering if I could ask Council Member Mr. Larry Wilkinson, if you don't mind presenting, is this a point of discussion for you right now or not? Your notice. Were you going to make that public or not?
Well, I
Mr.
was gonna
Chair,
share.
have
Larry
you just
Wilkinson.
outed Mr.
Forgive me, I just didn't want anybody being on the ad hoc
I
committee.
had-
That was, I think I did.
Okay.
I did, and I'm sorry, but.
I'm not.
At the beginning, referencing what Rolando was talking about, at the beginning of the meeting today, I gave Rolando a copy of my resignation. It's a 90-day notice of resignation to the governor's office with a thank you for the opportunity to serve. It has nothing to do with not being appointed or reappointed, though I have an opinion about that. It has to do with there's a lot of fish to catch and grandkids to tend to, and it's time. So it's really a retirement, not a resignation. Thank you.
Congratulations. But Yes, by all means, we're all here. It's our honor to serve, and I just don't want to get into creating an instability for this program should people get on an ad hoc committee. We meet so infrequently, and when we re-meet, the new faces aren't here, and so I just would like that consideration.
I have a question for General Counsel. If somebody is on this committee and then they're not reappointed, somebody new comes in, can other members be appointed in their place without having a meeting, or?
Do you mean appointed to the actual council?
No, to the
Ad hoc.
the work group.
The work group is actually at your command, sir. You
Breakfast,
can.
tacos, and cups of coffee.
We will, of course, have staff, and we will have members that you volunteer or whom are voluntold, as I think you were, Mr. McDonald. So, it's so nice of you to out Mr. Wilkinson, but
So
you
sorry.
just, and we appreciate your service, and thank
Absolutely.
you for making it 90 days. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And I do understand that grandkid thing. That's wonderful. But you might not want to appoint him. As you know, most of our, or you may not know, you all are appointed by the governor. Most of our boards are not appointed by the governor. They're appointed by our commission. They have an appointments office. Nick has the address to give you to reach out if you so choose. But I think the number on the website, I can't remember how many appointments that the governor has to make. And so we're at the mercy of, bless his heart, he has a lot of appointments to make. So you serve until someone else is appointed. If someone else comes in, you can replace them on that committee. If we happen to get appointments from the governor's office, it's at your discretion to replace someone from a committee, and we should have some continuity of work that they should be able to continue.
I stumbled through all of that for that intent, so thank you. It is, the overarching concern is just maintaining that continuity and that stability to be of counsel to staff and to the industry, so thank you. So with that said, Donna, you've received the voluntary service of both Mr. Doug Robinson and Mr. Scott McDonald. Who else would you like to ask to volunteer?
That's up to you, whoever's willing, I guess. How many do you want? Do you want 4?
I'd like to have at least 4.
So,
Is there interest from other council members?
I would like to be one of those. This
Mr.
is
Brown?
Roland Brown, if possible.
For the sake of those listening in, you know, council members are appointed by different backgrounds. For instance, I serve as the structural engineer on the council, and we've got a handful of on-site general contractors. We have an electrical engineer, also not here today. What a wonderful volunteering opportunity that is. That's Brian Eisenrich. Building officials, industry folks that are in the manufacturing side.
and the retail side.
And the retail side, yes.
And this is all by statute, so it's.
Correct.
It's all by law.
Correct, and so far, Mr. Scott McDonald is a building official. Mr. Roland Brown is with the manufacturing industry. And Mr. Doug Robinson,
He's with the retail side.
he's on the retail side? Okay.
And Doug and I are both commercial.
Is there anybody on the council that primarily deals with the residential side of the industry?
Not of the industry, no. I think there's some residential site builders,
On council?
yeah, down at the end there, next to the last.
Mr. Smith?
I guess I'm volunteered.
That is, not
Voluntold,
only
Mr.
is it appreciated, your enthusiasm to do so is greatly noted. We have our 4. So, council, thank you. Staff, thank you. We have an ad hoc committee to review the IHB rules. Of that council, of our council, it'll be Mr. Scott McDonald, chaired by Mr. Doug Robinson, forgive me, supported by Mr. Scott McDonald, Mr. Roland Brown, and Mr. Dub Smith. We look forward to your working with staff and reporting back to the council. Thank you. Anything else on this item, Laura?
No, unless you have any other questions.
Any other questions, council? Thank you so much. We can move to item F. Discussion, possible action regarding approval of third-party inspectors, third-party inspection agencies, and design review agencies.
You'll find that on page 33. Donna Lipke, Program Manager. On page 33, you have 4 third-party inspectors and 1 third-party site inspector who's met the criteria for approval, have been granted interim approval by the department. Now they require final approval by the council. They've all been found to meet the criteria as designated by the council.
Mr. Chair, motion to approve.
I have a motion to approve by Mr. Scott McDonald, a second by Mr. Randy Childress, to approve staff's recommendation to accept the approval of our third-party inspectors, third-party inspection agencies, and legal and design review agencies as noted on our packet. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Okay, we move forward to item G, informational presentation discussion including new concepts in modular housing manufacturing presented by Dr. Jeff Wilson of Casita. Mr. Wilson.
He's also known as Professor Dumpster.
Professor?
Professor Dumpster.
Excellent.
I should explain that, and I'm moving very slow because I've already been told that we move very slow at Casita, right? So thank all of you. Yeah, the Professor Dumpster, is it fine for me to stand here? The Professor Dumpster piece, is from when I landed here in Austin from the Valley. I actually been a professor down at UT Brownsville prior to this. I did an experiment where I lived in a 33 square foot trash dumpster, used dumpster for a year, with the idea that we would turn that into sort of the ultimate unpermitted tiny home, if you will. We didn't really say unpermitted, but we were trying to get in that 33 square feet down to 1% the energy usage and 1% the water, along with that 1% the size of the house that you'd use in a typical home. So I was a professor at Houston-Tillotson here on the east side of Austin at the time, and so it was kind of a fun experiment for my students and I to do. I'm not talking any more trash or, so to speak, or about dumpsters anymore today. I want to talk to you about a company that I started a couple of years ago, and I'm joined by my colleague here, our head of community and government relations and our diversity advocate, Mike Martinez, who was a council member here in Austin and head of the firefighters union for a while. So I want to talk to you a little bit about this concept. This isn't much of a technical conversation, but we're trying to think about industrialized housing in some new ways with this company. You know, we're really focused on affordability. There is a low amount of supply. For instance, in the San Francisco Bay Area, there are about 7 new jobs in the Bay Area to every 1 new housing unit. So in some markets, particularly, they're highly constrained by supply. Innovation in the sort of traditional stick-built industry. I had a professor back east in Virginia tell me that he thought one of the largest sort of pieces of innovation in the single-family home building industry since the 80s was the pre-assembled truss. And this caused a lot of problems actually with unions and such when they started delivering trusses with a piece of metal on it. So looking at the industry as an innovative sort of space, and then the other things that we know about industrialized housing, that it can be much faster. Last is the whole problem about land, that there's not much land left in our cities, particularly in the denser areas downtown. So this is a map actually of thousands of small pieces of underutilized land in Austin. And you'll see these, we've mapped these out in different sort of areas. It's difficult to read here on the display, but I think the blue areas were private parcels and the red are public. These are all smaller than 0.125 acres, and they're really irregularly shaped. So they're not pieces of land that folks would typically want to buy and develop. And our assertion is that with a very small product, we can go into those very small pieces of land and provide more housing. So we're looking at a product that's more deployable and that we can also get much higher rates of production. When you do go to a Guerdon or you go to a Clayton Homes, many of us have seen those factories where they produce homes. We, you know, a lot of those lines you'll see they're making 1,000 units, a couple of thousand units a year. The team that we've hired up, our supply chain person comes from Dell. Our quality person used to make a Cadillac every minute. I guess our president came from making Bell helicopters. We're trying to take a bit of a different approach to manufacturing in the housing industry such that we can get much higher levels of scale rather than just a few thousand a year if we can create that actual demand and then fit into the right location. So we're trying to deliver a product, and we think about this much more like a product, a branded product, rather than a typical home. So if you think about it, it's kind of crazy that this is the largest market in the world and there's no global brand around housing. And so what we're trying to do is create that here in Austin, something that can be recognized whether it's in California or if it's overseas, wherever it might be, as Casita in this case. So it comes fully outfitted, kind of turnkey, ready to move in. 98% of the finish out is actually done in our factory, inspected by these guys back here, and then ready to be delivered on site, coded and permitted, not on a trailer, right, and plugged in. So you get a lot faster sort of delivery. We've written a whole technology platform for the home. So you guys have seen the Alexa and some of the smart light bulbs and some of these things. We're the first to write a platform that actually gives you one single app interface to do that with. The streamlining in permits that TDLR affords us, and faster sort of gratification. So part of this talk was like the philosophy around thinking about home as a product. So, you know, rather than a sort of fixed one-off design, can we build something that is actually iterative? So what we have going on right now, we have every one of our employees, we have about 35 people, spend a night, at least 2 nights in the casita. I think Mike stayed in there with his son. We've had folks stay in there with their cats, their dogs, and then fill out very detailed questionnaires and feedback on how their night was in that unit, which allows us to iterate actually on the product, sort of like moving from an iPhone 6 to an iPhone 7, hopefully not back towards a dumpster sort of 1.0. It also, you know, this idea of building a brand and around the whole experience within a home rather than the interior design, and an overall experience versus convenience. And one of the key gaps that we have to cross here is that the idea is that everyone wants a custom home, right? The idea has always been that I would like a bespoke sort of custom, whether it's anything from a tiny home up to a home I'm building. And our hypothesis, what we're trying to show and what we're trying to do with TDLR is figure out how to actually get to scale. You know, if you were to build, 10 or 100 iPhones, they would be tens of thousands of dollars a piece. If we can build one floor plan and brand that and add the technology such that millennials, our second biggest market, are probably empty nesters that want to move back into town into a smaller place. If we can do that rather than a group like this is one company called Blue Homes out of California that has over 15 different floor plans, then we can get true scale out of our factories. So this is the actual unit. It's about 5-10 minutes, or depending on traffic, an hour and a half south of here. Down on 4th Street, just east of the convention center. This is our prototype. As you can see, it's a very high design product. It's not made from a dumpster. It's not made from a container or any existing structure. This was actually designed by a product designer originally, and then we got some architects involved in getting everything up to code. So very sleek kind of look. That siding can be replaced with different things to sort of meet a local environment. They're 352 square feet, so it is, in what some would class that kind of tiny home. But it's got everything that you'd need from a washer, dryer, bath, living area. We like to talk about functional square footage as well, like getting more out of less space. So the ability to pull out stairways underneath a particular hallway. The bed actually folds up underneath the kitchen here to make it feel more like 450, 500 square feet than the actual square footage that it is. We also have an accessible floor plan. One of our bigger parts of our mission is to create affordable housing for folks through some new sorts of models. So we want to make sure that we have this accessible to all. Some of the shots of the interior, again, a very high design feeling. Feels almost like you're in a very high design condo, but at much lower costs. We do have a home tour online. I don't think I can do that here, but you can actually, in a 3D way, sort of click through the unit. So we're looking at backyards to add more supply. We're actually working on a project out in Marfa, and then even tops of rooftops. So we're not looking to compete specifically with existing developers or single-family homes. We're looking at those cracks in the system, right, where we can deploy very quickly and go into smaller spaces or spaces people wouldn't traditionally be looking at. This is one example. This is actually in San Francisco. And after we get our TDLR permit fully completed soon, then we're going to go to California to the TDLR equivalent, which is HCD, Housing and Community Development, and get a stamp in California, such that on this little piece of land here, which is only a few blocks from the courthouse, from City Hall in San Francisco, the city owns this little piece of property in front of this parking garage where they have only a few parking spots. A studio apartment on that block is $3,400 a month for just a studio to rent. With the casita, we're going to be able to actually stack these because they stack as well. We're coding these to IBC. They have sprinklers, all the things that you'd need for that. We could stack these units up and with zero subsidies rent these for about $1,300, $1,400 a month, unsubsidized. And this particular project, we're working with the mayor's office in San Francisco to put artists in that housing at a fraction of what cost would be. So we also have this technology I talked about to where you can improve the indoor living experience quite a bit. Or if you have seniors living in these, you could do things like if somebody did fall, where a text message could go out to loved ones if that person wasn't able to get to their phone and let them know. We have a team from a diversity of backgrounds, as I mentioned, about 35 people working on this. We've gotten quite a few accolades, for this project. I think more around our bigger mission of really solving the housing crisis that we see in some of America's biggest cities. We have our inspections going on by TDLR. Our manufacturing's all done here in East Austin at this moment. We're building out this brand and the technology. So going forward, we're hoping to have by July delivering our first ADUs, if accessory dwelling units, backyard units. Then hopefully in August delivering our first stackable ones, and then moving into even some of the higher priced markets like California. So, you know, I'm sitting here because talking to you about some of these, about Casita, and we're in business to, you know, really go about housing the future, about looking at some of these affordable issues in some of our largest cities. This is a natural place to start here in Texas, here in Austin, and then to really spread this concept of a global brand around the world, starting right here with TDLR and in Austin. So thank you all very much for your time and for the process. I mean, it's just very difficult to scale housing like you'd scale almost anything else. And when we discovered that we could go through this TDLR process and roll out our units at a much larger scale, it's pretty refreshing to know that that we could do that. Thank you very much. Yes. Yes, sir.
Larry Wilkinson, how have you been received so far by, for example, the city of Austin? Building permits, minimum lot sizes, setback lines, number of dwellings that can be on a residence, can be on a property, things of that nature.
I'm going to defer to Mike here in a minute. Actually, the city's been great so far, and I do want to make clear that those lots, not all of those will fit a stack of casitas. Of course, you have to look at setbacks, height limitations, parking, all of those things. So we're not going into each one of those individual lots and putting stacks of casitas, but actually the mayor has been very helpful with this since the very beginning. We've had city staff out several times to our manufacturing facility, but Mike understands the pain and pleasure of city council, so I'll pass it to him.
Thank you. I'll be sure to fill out one of the testimony forms. I haven't done that yet. I'll get that to you. Austin actually has a pretty progressive ADU policy. As long as you have a standard 5750 square feet, that's a standard lot, 5750 in the city of Austin, you can add a secondary dwelling unit as long as you don't go over the impervious cover caps. And the impervious cover caps are typically 0.4 FAR ratio. The most progressive ADU policy, believe it or not, is in Leander, Texas. And so we're seeing in cities that are like Austin, that are growing big cities, even the suburban cities around them realize that there's an opportunity to create some additional living space, studio space. Some friends of mine have a teenager that doesn't want to be with his little brothers in the house, so they put a unit in their backyard, and that's where he lives. So there are many, many different uses, and we're finding that most communities are very welcoming of at least the concept. Now, in California cities and even in Texas cities, we are quickly finding that they may have some of the most progressive ADU laws on the books, but they have things like aesthetics as rules. So it has to match primarily, it has to match the primary structure in terms of its aesthetics. Those are the things that we are going to move into in terms of, as Jeff mentioned, we have the aluminum siding, stainless steel siding. We can change all of that to match the primary resident on the lot. And so we're learning as we go along. Santa Monica, California is the most progressive city in the country as it relates to ADUs, and their goal is to bring in several thousand because there's nowhere to build in Santa Monica at all. There's no land left. So that's what we've been working on.
Thank you.
Thank you. When you're, Rolando Rubiano, when you're placing one of these casitas or ADU units on an already built lot, are you being permitted as an addition or as a separate structure? Are you tying into the same utility systems? How are you working that?
Yes, so there's multiple ways of doing it, and we are talking to groups who have been working in this space for some time. In some ways, the primary property owner can condo their backyard and actually sell it off, because the financial institutions are looking for long-term stability before they lend any money to anyone. They don't really want you to have a leased space that you may get kicked off of, or the property owner may sell, and then you're stuck without a piece of land. So it's typically a permit for an accessory dwelling unit, and that's all it is. And then your utility drags are another separate permit. Just to build that unit that we saw, we had to build it in a traditional dwelling type setting, and so we had over 13 inspections from the city of Austin throughout that build. Once we get certified by TDLR, they'll be legally allowed in any city in the state of Texas with compliance with their permitting process to set the unit down.
And we've seen some real progressive stuff on building stock in other states. There's a Senate Bill 1069 in California. They just passed a law there that if you apply for a building permit for one of these backyard units, anywhere in the state of California, that permit must be issued in 120 days, which is incredibly quick, particularly in some of those cities out in California. So, just given the housing crisis, our ability to be able to make a unit much faster than that and deploy it, we think that, there's going to be a really large market out there as well. We're trying to approach this in a little bit of a different manner while learning from everything that's existed in the past and hoping to solve some big problems.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jesse Riley,
Yes, sir.
question. Have you had any kickback with the homeowners association in some of these subdivisions? Some of these subdivisions have strict homeowners association, and they restrict as what you can put on those lots in those subdivisions.
Yes, sir. We have, I've met with several of the kind of umbrella homeowners organizations here in Austin that sort of interface, and Mike's probably going to have some more to say about this as well, because I think he probably chatted with a few of those folks while on council. But yeah, we want to be very respectful that we're meeting the local architectural sort of requirements, and that the neighbors are into it. We are not taking an Uber approach to this, to where we're just going to cram things into regulatory structures. It's one of the reasons why we hired Mike. We've been spending a lot of time with the neighborhoods and the city governments. And there are things that exist that I think that we could actually do something for that neighborhoods aren't that happy with. There's something called stealth dorms, which is something we've seen here in Austin, where a developer will go buy a house, divide it up into 12 different rooms, and fit through some loopholes, and they're sitting there in the middle of a neighborhood with a bunch of families that that wasn't what they bought into. So if we were to have a casita rack or some of these on the sort of outskirts of that neighborhood, it would almost be like sort of a vacuum cleaner for some of those millennials out of that, out of the middle of those neighborhoods. So we're trying to think about it that way as well. But
Yes, sir. The short answer is yes. There are deed restrictions that we will never be allowed to put a casita in. That's standard all across the country. It's not unique to Texas. It's not unique to Austin. Avery Ranch comes to mind. You're never going to see a casita in the backyard at Avery Ranch. There's restrictions, and where those restrictions apply, that's simply not going to be an area where we can market these.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Dub Smith, I've got 3 questions.
Yes, sir.
What's your price point on the current product you have?
So we're very much taking a sort of Tesla approach to this. Right now, I'd say we have something between a Roadster and a Model S. The current retail on that unit is what we publish as $139. We are now working on getting that to, at developer pricing, bulk pricing, around $99. The idea being that we're only making, we only expect to make 20, 30 of these this year. By ramping up our supply chain and our manufacturing, we can get that cost down a lot. Now, what folks generally do will say, okay, I'm going to divide that by square footage and come up with a price per square foot. And it's very expensive, particularly in this market, on a price per square foot. The way that we're looking at it is, well, first off, very small units. It's not a kind of linear relationship, right, down to zero on price per square foot. This feels much larger, and we're thinking about it more as a kind of price per door, really, on what somebody would either rent these for or buy them for. So, yeah, the idea is through, after getting our permits, to get that cost down further.
Who's financing them, and have you had problems with your appraisals as a result?
It's a big hurdle. Yeah, we have, because there are very few comps for micro units like this anywhere in the country. Actually, the closest ones that we've found, are on the Upper West Side in New York. We've found that units, like this with a particular brand and micro units are renting at about 2 times the price per square foot that other kind of units in that area are. So financing is going to be a big issue for us. I mean, eventually we'd like to figure out how to do some of the financing ourselves. RV loans are one of the ways that we've looked at this, which have a little bit shorter term. Those kind of things are easy, but getting a 30-year mortgage is a typical place. I think we're going to get there, but we don't have 2 years of financials to show a bank right now.
The other thing is, as long as things go on the same path they're going on, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have changed their rules, and the new rule implementation starting this January will allow traditional mortgages for modular housing for the first time ever. And so we're looking into that space for the financing as well. As far as appraisals, we think they're going to look at them primarily as some type of prefab modular home, but we just don't know until we get one on the ground and actually get our first appraisal done here in Texas.
The reason I was asking, I'm an appraiser, I'm an MAI, and Austin's affordability is a problem. And I've done the duplex condo, I've done the modular structures. That's what Don and how we were introduced. And I think you were on the city council when I got my 33 inspection requests and my 27 311 calls the day we moved half of it in on 4500 Hank Avenue in the south of Ben White. So I understand what you're going through. It would seem to me, though, that a stick-built structure in the backyard is the competition, is it not? Because price point-wise, it's a lot cheaper to bring it in one stick at a time and erect it.
It is.
Than try to do the module.
It is. It is, and it's much more competitive. If you do it stick-built, you could probably get it a lot cheaper. But here are some subtle differences that we think make a big difference. When you stick-build something, it's permanently affixed. It's stuck. Our units go on a foundation as well, but they can be moved at a later date. They can be taken off of that property and moved somewhere else. And we think that there is maybe a small market, but there is a market for that because of the ability to move it after it's been placed. Even our stacked versions, once we put those in place, they can be removed and redeployed in a different fashion. We were talking to FEMA this last week about using these for potential FEMA housing in the future as well.
Yeah, that seems to be the problem is you've got to be in the at the Henry Ford level. You can't build one car at a time. You got to do.
Well, lastly, I would invite all of you to come out and see the unit. It's on East 4th Street, 1304. We would be happy to meet you there, let you tour it. Our prototype is on that site, so you can see how much we've evolved from our prototype to the pre-production, and now our production unit that TDLR is certifying is under construction, and it's even better than the one you're going to see on 4th Street.
When's your IPO coming out?
They're still recording. I will. We can get some information to Donna and her group about the location of the prototype we're also on Thursday mornings. We have it open to the public from 9:30 to 11:30. So, but the comment about Henry Ford and the Model T, that's what we need to do, right? You can have any floor plan as long as this is a floor plan, and we're hoping to generate demand by the technology and the brand around it. And then we can get costs down, and we will eventually be able to compete with stick. So, is that it?
It's a great
Thank
idea.
you.
Just keep pushing.
Thank you, and thank you guys for being here. We're really excited about getting that approval so that we can, start down that Henry Ford path. So.
Anything further, council? Dr. Wilson, thank you.
Okay, thank
Best
you.
of luck. Thank you. Council, if I may, I believe some of our members are tight on time. If the informational presentation, item H, forgive me, can bear with me for just a moment. I'm going to, hate to do this, but I'm going to bump up items I, J, and K before we address item H. So please, I'll beg your patience, and we're going to run through items I, J, and K fairly quickly. Does council have any objections to that? All right. Do we have any public comments? Anybody who wishes to address us should have filled out a public comment form. Those that have addressed us that have not yet filled it out, we'd appreciate that help. And this is going to go real quick, so thank you so much. I think the only pending public comments is going to be the pending informational presentation by Falcon Structures. So if that's it, we'll move on to agenda item J, recommendations for agenda items for next council meeting. I have one recommendation. I think it would be worthwhile for the council to consider selecting a new chairman for council and a new vice chairman. So if that could be considered as part of an agenda item for the next meeting, that might be worthwhile. Don and I spoke. We can't do it this time because it was not on the agenda, but we need to get it on the agenda for the next meeting.
Might work with appointments as well.
It might work with appointments as well.
Mr. Chair, Randy Childers, also, I guess, a report, maybe an interim report of the committee work group that was just formed? Or final, but I'm not sure how quick. I know they don't want to wait 6 months. Right.
That's all I was going to bring up.
Excellent. So a report on our rule revisions or rule reviews?
The only other thing is if there's some other aspect of the program that you would like us to, educate you on?
I think that's great if you could help with a presentation on the interaction between now the manufacturers, the selling of the product, but more importantly, the introduction of the product on site, and when do the responsibilities shift between manufacturer and the industrialized builder, and then if you could throw in a discussion of what happens in our rural portions of our state versus our developed portions of our states, in particular as they pertain to authorities having jurisdiction. Anything else, council? Okay. Item K, discussion of date, time, and location for next council meeting. I think we've had a discussion of 6 months from now, so we're looking at December 23rd.
Yeah, I think we need to go for January here, so.
And that sounds great. If staff and our committee can look towards,
We'll get some dates for you.
sometime in January.
Okay.
Second, third week of January? Second or third week of January? I'm sorry? Oh, Tamla, go. Get us tied in.
You guys tend to like Fridays, shooting with Fridays in January 2018. Which is the week of the January 12th, which is a Friday, the 19th or the 26th.
I will tell you the 12th is during the Home Builders Annual Board of Directors and Trade Show. So on-site residential, like myself, cannot make it. Eddie Martin.
Okay. How about the 19th or 26th? So if council members don't have any particular objections, can we ask staff to send out a survey of those two dates, the 19th and 26th of January 2018, please? Okay. All right. Council, anything else on items J or K? With that said, I'd like to move back to item H, which is the informational presentation and discussion, including overview of container structures and industry update on compliance path for utilizing modified ISO containers as building elements. The presentation is by Stephen Shang of Falcon Structures, and again, welcome and thank you for the presentation. There are at least one council member that I know that is going to be exiting the stage right, so don't mind us.
No problem. It'll be on YouTube, right? So, fantastic. So I wanted to talk today, was asked to talk more about the container structures industry and where exactly is it going. There's been some interesting developments on the International Code Council front. So the first half of this presentation will be really around getting everyone up to speed on the same page as far as container structures go. And then the second half will really be about the compliance paths forward that we see. And just so y'all know, this presentation isn't something that is just Falcon's viewpoint on the world. We actually formed an industry advisory committee to really talk about this. And so we asked companies from all over the country to participate. You can see Boxman's out of North Carolina, Pac-Man's a regional player. You even got one guy here in the lower right, Luke Eisman, who actually lives in a container in Oakland, California. So we drew on his experiences as well. So really going back in time, where did these containers come from? The phase one of containerization that we saw really came around in the 1950s. And that's when this guy named Malcolm McLean came up with the idea of the shipping container, that he could really revolutionize the way that goods were moved across the world by using containerization. And so he started developing these things. It really caught on. It was a huge breakthrough in international trade. And because of the efficiency and standardization of the containers, what we see is today there are about 35 million containers in circulation. So a whole lot around the world. Kind of phase two, this is when in the 80s when there were problems with theft on job sites, and some entrepreneurs out of California started looking at this, in Arizona, thinking, you know what, we've got all these containers in the port, maybe we could use those for really storing tools on job sites and using these things for portable storage. And so whereas you saw them really getting stacked all over time, they started getting deployed deployed in the U.S. And so the 5 key factors that they really saw was they were available, they were affordable, they really leverage the strength and durability of containers. They're easy to move and they're easy to set up. And so you start seeing these containers start proliferate around the U.S., on construction sites, behind retail stores and all that, primarily for the use of storage containers. That's when we got involved at Falcon in 2002. My co-founder Brian and I started this business here in Austin. And we grew this to about 1,200 rental units across the central Texas area. But as we started participating in this market, we really saw this third phase of containerization happening, where people were constantly coming to us saying, hey, could you build me this out of a container? Aren't these just like big Lego blocks? What can you do with these things? And so that's kind of the usherance of kind of phase 3 of containerization, where we're really starting to see them used as structures more than just portable storage. So here's an example of a 40-foot container, 320 square feet that's used for living purposes. And this is the one you see in Yahoo News and all that everyone likes to talk about. But they're kind of more behind-the-scene type uses as well. Here you have like a temporary pop-up facility for the Gators. Couldn't find one for the Longhorns, but one for the Gators, where you see them setting this structure up right before a football game. And then here up at SMU, we have kind of a container village that's built out of containers. And these are really tailgating containers. So you show up, drop down the container, open up the doors, and there's your keg, there's your big screen TV. You even got a deck to party on. So the company out of Dallas is doing those. Here what you see is kind of a more industrial application for security purposes at a lot of kind of key assets like refineries and such, where they need to control the entrance and access. Instead of building an entire gate system, what they do is they actually plop down a container and kind of it's really a turnkey security access point. We're starting to see more and more of these, which is containers in our industrial complex to house equipment, to really have control centers in them. One example would be like the DAPL pipeline that was built from North Dakota down to Texas. We were able to build 315 control units along the pipeline to really operate that pipeline. And then last but not least, our military is really using these in huge volumes to build simulated cities for training purposes. And so one project that we were able to participate in was building an entire city out of containers, about 700 containers in New Mexico, all simulating out there. So what we asked the advisory panel is, if that's really what's happening, what have been the market trends that we've seen in the past 10 years for this container structures industry? And so the first trend that we saw was 10 years ago when we got into this business. This is what other people are saying. It was really, really hard to tell people what you did. When I went to a party and I told someone I was in the storage container business, they thought I was going to try to sell them Tupperware. And so then I'd have to describe to them, do you remember that movie, I, Robot? Do you remember that scene where all the robots were fighting? They were fighting in containers. They're like, oh, yeah, I get it now. Today, it's like you can't go outside, and I guarantee you after this presentation, if you start looking around, containers are everywhere. They've become ubiquitous. It's kind of like, when's the last time you went to Starbucks and you walked out and there was a Starbucks across the street? So there are plenty of containers around. The second trend that we've seen in the last 10 years is 10 years ago, we really had to push the features and the benefits of containerized structures, whereas today, it seems like everyone has an idea for containers. We're getting a lot of attention from industries that we never imagined. We've been building fire training structures. All the marijuana farmers are wanting to use containers for things. It's amazing the different types of things. 10 years ago, one of the things we saw was that everyone had ideas that knew about containers, but very few people actually got the money to do it. It was a bunch of designers sitting around playing with Google SketchUp. Now granted, some of those ideas were really bad ideas and probably shouldn't have been done. But today what we're seeing is Fortune 500, Fortune 50 companies are actually reprioritizing their budgets to really spend money on these container structures because they're really seeing the ROI on investing in these things. So then if we look at that, we kind of talk about, okay, what about the present? Why do customers currently choose container structures to solve their functional space problems, right? And there are 5 real key reasons that came back from our panel. The first one is that they're extremely secure. There is no other functional space structure out there that is as heavy duty as far as construction goes, and it's very, very difficult to break into. The second is that these things last for a long time. Because they are all steel construction, what we see is these containers, if you talk to the accountants who should know how long things last, they should be able to be depreciated over 25 years to a 75% salvage value. So who wouldn't want to invest in something that only depreciates at 1% per year? And the maintenance costs are actually pretty low. The third reason that people are investing in containers is there is a worldwide network that we've seen of transportation already built because of shipping. So to actually move these containers around is just leveraging an existing network, and it makes a lot of sense. The fourth advantage that our advisory panel told us about is that these are stackable. Now, I'm a huge container nerd. You can ask my wife. Anytime we go on vacation, we go into a city, I'll want to go visit the ports. But these containers, if you think about it for just a second, the stackability of them, you can stack them 9 high. And you can put 67,000 pounds in each container and still stack it 9 high. So if you do the math on that, that container at the very bottom of that stack is supporting 500,000 pounds. I mean, I just get all geeked out about that. And then the last point is that they're fast. And that's really leveraging off modular construction, something that this group is very familiar with. But because we're building them in a factory, putting all of the instrumentation in there, and then deploying them, it actually makes a lot of sense. Now, who remembers the piano tie? Anyone still have it? Okay, I still have mine. But you know, the other thing that came back from our advisory panel was that there were really kind of three kind of more fad type things on why people are choosing containers. And I think, you know, even though they're fads, it's worthwhile to note them. The first one is this. This is the concept of industrial chic. And you know, today we might look at that and go, ooh, that's really cool. I think, you know, 20, 30 years from now, we might look at that and go, ooh, why would you put a bunch of containers by, you know, the ocean in this beautiful landscape? So, you know, will that stick with us? We don't know. The second is people think containers are cool now. For some reason, these big corrugated boxes, you go to a cocktail party with me now, and it's like, oh, wow, you do containers? That's really cool. I'm like, what's so cool about it? It's a big box, right? The third one is they're green. You know, when I've talked to environmental groups and all that, they all think I'm out to save the world. I'm a businessman. I'm trying to make money. I'll go on the record for saying that. But, you know, the green movement really is behind these containers. And I think one of the key reasons is that, you know, if you were going to deconstruct a container versus build something in it, you actually save 95% of the energy to do that. So, okay, that's a good reason. Fourth, for my casita friends here, you know, the whole tiny home movement. People are always asking us, can you live in a container? Can you live in a container? I'm like, I've been trying to ask my wife to live in a container with me for 15 years, and she won't do it because we have 2 little kids. I don't know how you could possibly live in there, but we do get a lot of calls of people who want to live in containers. But then the last big mega trends that we're seeing with respect to container structures is I really do believe that there's this migratory nature of humans kind of mega trend that's happening where people, okay, think about it this way. If we were born in a village like 200 years ago, we would probably grow up in that village, work in that village, eat in that village, die in that village. Today, nobody stays in one place for very long. Everyone's constantly moving, right? And so one of the things we're observing is if people are constantly moving, why is our infrastructure not built to constantly move as well? And so containers really afford that because you can put them together, you can set them up, and then you can take them down and move it to the next place. We're not just talking about houses. We're talking about buildings. We're talking about support systems like water treatment plants. All these things can be built within a container, and as populations move, the structures can move with them. So then the last thing we asked our advisory panel is, okay, based on what you see today, where do you see the future of the container structures industry, right? So the first one is that, you know, we continue to see applications evolve. And we don't have a very large R&D group at Falcon, but what we hear from the people in the marketplace, they are constantly coming at us with new ideas on how to use containers. And it's really fascinating to see that kind of crowdsourcing type model for ideas where we're not having to invest in it. What we're having to do is to listen. The second is that there's a high degree of specialization that needs to happen in our industry. Today what you see is you have manufacturers that are also distributors, that are also service centers. But similar to the car industry, one of the things I see happening is that our industry will really start to segment so that the manufacturers truly will be manufacturers and they work well with people like TDLR. We'll have dealerships where people are actually focused on selling it and maintaining the customer relationship. And then we'll have people who actually repair the containers when they start needing that part of the service. The third direction we see the industry is going, right now there are a lot of mom and pops in our industry and there are no standard regulations. And so there are guys out there who are just cutting holes in containers and they're not really thinking twice about it. What I have to say in the years that we've been doing this is that if you cut a hole in a container, you better replace it with something else, right? These things are structures, but they're heavy. 9,000 pounds for an empty container. You don't want to be messing around with that. So what I see, and this is one of the things we've been working on, is how do you develop standards for an industry that's emerging, especially as the marketplace is catching on. The fourth is really all the companies we surveyed in this industry are very bullish as far as the growth of the industry. Everyone sees a very bright future ahead. You hear people saying the sky's the limit. Would we ever build something like that? I don't know if Donna's group would ever approve that, but you know, it would be the thing. And then the fifth kind of key future that we see is that the code problem is finally solved. One of the things about the existing codes with the IBC is that container structures are not addressed, nor are temporary structures very well defined. And so that's really the second half of this presentation is to talk about, you know, what exactly is the code landscape and the regulatory landscape for these container structures. So I'll pause right there to see if there are any questions before I move on to that about just container structures in the past, and then we can dive into the fun stuff with the code.
This is Rolando. Thank you. Rolando Rubiano. One of the things that I'm curious about is insurability of these items. You know, we're selling these homes, and similar to the previous presenter, we're trying to create a market where we're gonna go sell these homes. And then the question gets to be, well, who's gonna insure a home? Just like we all have, presumably have insurance on our homes for fire, for flood, for damaged pipes, for windstorm and hail. How do you start engaging insurance companies in that insurance industry to say, hey guys, these are really viable structures that can take the impact of not only wear and tear, but the impact of the environmental loading conditions that exist?
Good question. So when we were in the rental business, we had 1,200 units all around Central Texas, and very few of those were home units. Actually, at Falcon, we tend to stay away from home building. We see that more of an art. It's very high-end stuff. We tend to stick with industrial, but we still get the crazy, doomsday prepper or the hunter who wants to, one of these for his hunting camp type thing. And so how do you go about insuring them? There are insurance companies now that understand containers, and they're willing to insure them. Now, they're not your typical home insurance people, but the guys that we had insuring our 1,200 container fleet were guys like that insured equipment. They understood equipment. No problem. Any questions? Other questions? Okay, so I'm going to dive into the code part of this. So, one of the things that's come around, if you look at the IBC, first of all, it does not address containers, right? But there are all these companies that are starting to build structures out of containers. And so what ICC did through their evaluation service was last year, about February of last year, they issued AC 462, acceptance criteria 462. And this really took the industry by surprise. They didn't really get a lot of industry feedback on this. And what we saw as an industry is there were a few positives to this. First and foremost, that they are recognizing that container structures are here, and we have to have some way of actually regulating that. But there are huge negatives to it. It really, if you read it to the detail that if you guys want to get into it, we can, but it really recommends a purpose-built container that pretty much wipes out all 35 million containers that are currently in circulation and says, okay, this is how you have to build a container from scratch if you're going to build a container structure. And so really it destroyed the green element of everything, the energy savings and all that. And so the other key point that the industry really took issue with is, is it a go-forward type of initiative, or is it retroactive? Because AC 462 is written in such a way, you could interpret it as, all the different containers that are currently in circulation that are being used for storage containers, that are being used for ground level offices, it actually applies to those. And then if that's the case, how do we go about getting everything compliant? And so what we've seen is, Texas has adopted this to some extent. State of Georgia, I've spoken to them about this. They're thinking about adopting this. Virginia has accepted this. California has said, no, we're not doing this, but we're creating our own. And so there's a lot of regulatory momentum happening around AC 462. And what's at stake really is there's about $500,000 in ground level offices out there that industry has invested a lot of money into that are out as rental containers. Guys like William Scotsman, ModSpace, with smaller guys like Pac-Van and Mobile Mini, they've got a lot at stake. The other one is there are about 650,000 storage containers, right? And so these are all used for portable storage, but they're multi-container structures. What we're seeing is kind of modular building programs really look at this and trying to figure it out, and it can dramatically affect industry economics if not implemented correctly. But on the flip side of this, what we assess as an industry is that, yeah, public safety is a real issue, and these have to be regulated somehow. So how do we go about solving this problem? And so what we did was we formed this Container Structures Task Force. So under the auspices of the Modular Building Institute, who y'all know, as well as the National Portable Storage Association, which is a lesser-known organization but really represents container companies, we actually formed this task force and assembled pretty much a wide array of companies to serve together. And in the springtime of this year, they actually all came down to Austin for this huge summit where we really talked through how do we address this thing called AC 462 and how do we actually respond to it well. And I'll fast forward and do a little foreshadowing. A couple weeks ago, we actually issued a white paper to the ICC to talk about this very issue, and it's been very well received. And so a lot of what we talk about here will be kind of highlights from that white paper. So the first thing we did was like, look, let's go ahead and dispel some of these myths about containers. Let's really help people understand what exactly are containers made of and why we think they are safe structures to begin with. So first of all, if you talk to a lot of people out there that are anti-container, there are misconceptions. They're concerned about the steel because it's Chinese steel and not U.S. steel, because it has different standards that it may not be as strong. And so we've really kind of done a lot of research on kind of the steel, the yield strengths, the tensile strengths, and all that. They're concerned about poor welds with the containers, where everything, all the welding that's done on these containers are actually factory welded, which is pretty impressive. And then they're concerned about pesticides. I don't know if you guys have ever been on the site treehugger.com, but if you go on there, what you'll find is if you have a container structure, you're going to die, okay, because the pesticides in the floor are going to kill you right away. And you know, I've been officing out of a container for about 15 years now, and aside from this rash that I have on my back, I'm doing pretty good. But that said, you know, they have this image that containers are actually built in this very kind of shoddy manner. But the truth is that containers are actually professionally manufactured. And we've actually spent some time in China looking at the container plants there. But these are ISO 9000, ISO 9001 factory certified plants. And they are building these things in just unbelievable volume with unbelievable quality controls and all that. Just to be more specific on that, there are two kind of governing bodies that oversee the production of containers. One is the ISO, the International Standards Organization. And ISO 1496, ISO was founded in 1946, right? And right now there are 164 national standards bodies that actually use ISO, including the US, okay? And their mission at ISO is to make things work. They would give us a set of specifications so that the world can get standardized. And so these containers are built to ISO 1496, and it's all performance-based specs. So if you ever take the time to read it, it's about how much weight can it take, how much kind of stress can it take. All these things are regulated by ISO 1496. And then in 1972, the U.S. actually entered into an international agreement called the CSC, Convention for Safe Containers, okay? And so the U.S. has adopted this. Multiple countries all around the world have adopted this. But what the CSC does is it actually tries to enforce what's going on with ISO. So there are agencies that actually go through and inspect the containers. They have periodic inspection points saying how long can a container be used. If a container is damaged, how do you go about fixing it? So these are both international bodies that are really governing what's going on with a container. Now, if you look at the front of a container, you'll see this is called a CSC plate, okay? And so on here, what you have is you have a classification society, whether it be American Bureau of Shipping, Lloyd's Register, Bureau Veritas, whoever it is, they actually affix this plate on the container saying, look, we have inspected this to the ISO standards and to the CSC regulations, and it's okay. And you have the testing and certification, and so you kind of review the container design. We've done the load tests, we've done the dimensional checks, and it has regular inspection points. And so then the second step we took on this was we said, okay, since we're using them as building structures, let's take a look at what's going on with IBC and compare it with the ISO standards that are out there. So we used Ralph Tavares, who's an engineer out in California, has experience with container structures and a very active member of the MBI. And so he did a couple of tests for us. One is a lateral comparison, and so this is pretty technical and hard to see. But on the right-hand side, what you have is you have the IBC requirements, okay? And I think we took the wind loading from Key West, Florida, okay, so a very windy environment. We also took the seismic standards from Eureka, California, very earthquake-prone area. We said, okay, how does the ISO, which is the center column here, compare with the IBC? And even at a safety factor of 5, you can see that the ISO far exceeds any requirements that the IBC would be placing on the containers. In fact, I think it's like a 2 to 3x kind of factor. Then we kind of did the same thing with the gravity comparison, right? How do the roofs stand up to things? How do the floors stand up to things? And again, what you see is okay, okay, okay. So the ISO standards actually far exceed any IBC standards that we see out there. And then what we did was, okay, seldom do you see containers without holes cut in them these days, especially if they're being used for structures. And so if we did a prototypical container, one door, 2 windows on one side of the container, would it withstand the IBC standards? And what we found out was, yes, in fact, it does. So we've got support on all these calculations if you'd like to see those. And then the other part about the pesticides. And so on every CSC plate, what you see is there is a timber treatment component. And so inside the containers, they are using pesticides that have really scary names called Bacillium, Tellurium, Rhodalium, right? And before I did this research, I had no idea what those things are. So we actually called on the Center for Toxicology and Environmental Health, based out of Little Rock, Arkansas. They are the same toxicologists that actually did the research on the formaldehyde in the FEMA trailers, as well as the Chinese gypsum poisoning. We asked them, you know, what exactly are these chemicals and are they dangerous for humans? And so they did a lot of research on this, and what they came back was is they have a fairly selective toxicity to insects, but virtually non-toxic to mammals. Okay? And then they go on to talk about vapor pressure and all that, and everything on treehugger.com. You're not going to die if you're inside a container. It's going to be okay. Main exposure routes are really through dermal contact and ingestion of dusts. So if you have employees who are actually eating container floors, you probably have huge problems. But worst case scenario, these container floors can be encapsulated. Okay, and there are methods to do that. And so currently what we're doing is we're actually working with CTEH to actually publish a peer-reviewed type study on these chemicals, saying that they're okay, and develop a testing protocol. And so the solution that we recommended to the ICC is to really look at this in several different ways. One is by the size of the container structure. So for single container structures, this is a 20-foot office unit. You see a lot of these on construction sites. That perhaps an exemption is worthwhile on this, because these are in fact temporary structures. They aren't going to be there that long, but that if they are going to be temporary, the ICC really needs to get together and define what exactly is temporary, because in IBC codes you don't see that. We should conform to codes that are related to public health. Because there's electricity running through here, we should definitely conform to the electrical codes. But other types of codes that are a little bit more, for example, like the roof having a 2% slope, that may not matter as much for these temporary type structures, and perhaps they should be exempt from that. For multi-container structures, these are a little bit more dangerous. And so what we recommended is that, look, first, we need to develop a criteria for selection. You can't just use any container to build something like this. You might have problems if you do that. We really need to admit that there are design strengths with the container so that the engineers have something to use, right? Require structural calculations as well as an engineering stamp. We just built a stadium out of 125 containers, and they go 3 stories high, and we have 40-foot containers turned up on its side like towers. We got an engineer involved in that, right? You don't want to just go out and do that and say, oh yeah, everything is fine. And then really, for multi-containers, one of the things we're really advocating, and I'm hoping I can talk more with Donna about this, is to allow containers in a state-level modular building program. California is starting to move in that direction, and the question is, how can we do that so that these can be regulated and they can be safe? And then, as you do things like this and you have plumbing, electricity, and all that, additional inspections is necessary. And then as far as the pesticides go, there's still concerns about that, so we're commissioning that industry report, but really developing a testing protocol. And so far, CTEH has come back and said, look, the best testing protocol really is what's called a wipe test. It's very simple. You wipe it down, you send it to a lab. They come back and say, look, based on the thresholds we've developed, these are safe. So progress to date, I've kind of foreshadowed some of this. This has been kind of the first joint effort between MBI and NPSA. We're in meetings with the ICC. I think I'm going to be serving on the ICC task force on containers here in the not too distant future. We're working with different states across the country. California has issued their regulations, so we're coming up with a response to that. And the white paper, if you'd like, I can email it to Donna and get it to you guys if you're interested in reviewing that. But really, the key theme is that AC 462, it is one path forward. A company called SG Blocks has actually gotten AC 462 compliant containers now. We're not really sure how they did it because they're saying that those containers are all manufactured in the US, so therefore they're not shipping containers in the traditional sense. But to really consider alternate compliance paths as well and really go through the research on that. So that's all I got. Any other questions?
Council?
It's always fun to be the last one. Yeah, that's right.
Thank you so much.
You bet.
Council, that was the presentation from Falcon Structures. We are moving to agenda item L, short of further discussion on agendas J and K. If there is nothing else, either from staff or council, then is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
I have a motion to adjourn from
Eddie Martin.
Eddie Martin, and a second from Mr. Jesse Ryder. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you so much.